If you crave the unknown, but fear the dark, then Delphi. After dawn is your sanctuary. As the first light of dawn breaks through the night, we embark on a journey into the mysteries that chill the spine. I'm your host, Jason King, and together, we'll explore the stories that lurk in the shadows. Each episode, we unravel chilling tales of unsolved crimes, police corruption, and heart-wrenching disappearances. Imagine a world where over 600,000 people vanished last year alone in the U.S., leaving behind only questions and heartache. Violent crime is on the rise, and the shadows grow longer each day. By joining us, you become a beacon for the voiceless, a light in the darkness. Together, we'll shine a light on society's darkest corners, uncovering the truths that hide in plain sight. From the eerie silence of abandoned buildings to the bustling streets where secrets are whispered, we leave no stone unturned. Tune in to Delphi After Dawn, where understanding is just a story away. Join us and let the journey begin. As we delve deeper, remember that every story has a heartbeat, a pulse that connects us all. We navigate through the labyrinth of human experience, seeking answers and shedding light on the unknown. So prepare yourself for a journey like no other, where every revelation brings us closer to the truth. Delphi. After Dawn is more than just a podcast. It's a community of seekers, united by curiosity and compassion. Together, we can make a difference, one story at a time. Join us and let the journey begin anew. In the shadows of the city, where secrets are commodities and trust is a luxury, one man delves into the minds of the monstrous. Welcome to the world of Jason King, a detective with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and a heart as resilient as steel. Beneath the ordinary scenes of daily life, grim tales of notorious serial killers lurk. Each one, unique in their madness, leaves behind a chilling legacy of victims and unsolvable puzzles. But the twisted minds of these murderers never elude Jason King. With every episode, the stakes rise. Every grim detail, each hideous crime, King peels back layer by layer. In a world where evil is the norm and horror is the narrative, Jason King remains steadfast. His mission? To uncover the dark consciousness of terror. His promise? Justice. This is Jason King's world, where crime is not just confronted, but comprehended. Dive deep into the chilling tales of serial killers with Jason King.
News Extra, the man who committed what may be the crime of the century. His name is John Wayne Gacy, convicted of killing 33 innocent people and destroying hundreds of lives. He's never talked to anyone about the case until tonight. His murder spree was first discovered on a cold December day when the first of his victims were found in the crawl space beneath his home. They were taken out one by one as the world watched. For 13 years, Gacy refused to talk. But tonight, he's breaking that silence, walking out from death row in Menard State Prison to speak one-on-one with Channel 2's Walter Jacobson. Walter is here now to tell us what Gacy had to say in an exclusive interview. Walter.
Quite a bit. Well, I spent 2.5 hours with John Gacy listening to a whole new story about his case. He was rambling and often inconsistent, but always very cagey. 13 years ago, he told the police how he murdered his victims. Now he's telling me he never did.
People don't want to know the truth and the honesty of it. If they want to be convinced they're brainwashed into what they believe, then fine, then go ahead and kill me. But vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime.
Those are the words of John Wayne Gacy, pleading innocence from death row at Menard State Penitentiary 13 years after being convicted of his crimes. The most notorious serial killer of our time.
When they paint the image that I was this monster who picked up like these altar boys along the street and swatted them like flies, I said, this is ludicrous.
But the jury didn't find it ludicrous. After barely 2 hours deliberation, its verdict was murder by Gacy, 33 times, 29 bodies buried in that house of his on Summerdale, a crime of horrendous proportions. In the crawl space underneath, bodies covered with lime and encased in plastic, dug up a few days before Christmas and carried into the December cold, one after another after another. But despite all this evidence, he says he has proof he didn't do it. Here's one of dozens of examples of what he calls proof.
I've taken 3.5 hours of truth serum, and under sodium amytal, the maximum amount that I could have, it shows that I have no knowledge of the crime whatsoever. Never have had.
But this is where his attempt to change history, which is what he thinks will get him a new trial, begins to break down. There is no proof anywhere that he ever took truth serum. Now, it's not only a matter of physical evidence, it's a character issue as well. Many times during our interview, he tried to portray himself as a good guy, an ethical, hard-working family man. Here's how he describes himself as a father.
Loving and caring. I've always looked after my children, even now.
What kind of values do you remember imparting to them?
The kind of values?
Were you strict with them too?
No, not as strict as, no. A lot of things that my dad did, I refused to do, because I don't believe in hitting children. I don't believe in spoiling a child either. My values are such that if you give enough love to a
You're
children...
accused of murdering 33 kids, and you say you didn't believe in hitting. I mean...
Well, anybody that knows... You see, first of all, you're basing this garbage on what you've heard of me.
And what the jury said, and what the courts of appeal have said. And the prosecutor who put him in jail says Gacy is a ruthless and sadistic killing machine.
He's responsible. He knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it in advance, and he carried it out, and he enjoyed it.
And he admitted it. In fact, boasted of it to the police. But now, 14 years later, he's denying it and talking to me about it. What does Prosecutor Kunkel think of that?
He's a desperate man. He's going to die in 2 or 3 years. He's going to be executed when the law is finally carried out. And he'll clutch at any straw.
2.5 hours of clutching at straws, cunning and manipulative denials. But if you listen carefully, you catch him slipping up. About John Bukovic, for instance, his second victim.
What happened to what happened in the Bukovic case? Where was he picked up, and how did he get to the house, and what happened with him?
I don't want to go into the other the 5 that I know about. Just take it that I didn't. Bukovic is not one that I killed, so I don't know nothing about him. The little bit that I know about him is that he was an employee of mine. See, when you look about this recall business, and
I'm not a prosecutor, John, but you just
I know
said
you're not.
Bukovic
Wait a minute.
is not one that you killed, which suggests that maybe in fact there were others that you did kill. I mean, I'm not.
Okay, I'm sorry if I led you to believe. No, strike it then. That is wrong.
But it's too late to strike it. There are others he killed, children he lured into his home anyway, who didn't get out alive. When he was arrested, he told the police what he did and how he did it, with a rope that he used as a tourniquet. Now he says he didn't do it, and shows me his rope trick to explain how the police misunderstood. That and more of what he's twisting into his pleas of innocence tomorrow. Linda, Bill?
Fascinating, Walter. Look forward to tomorrow.
Years ago, a jury deliberated for just 2 hours before finding John Wayne Gacy guilty of murdering 33 young men and boys. The evidence seemed clear. Gacy went to death row. But tonight in News Extra, a Channel 2 exclusive, John Gacy speaks out, claiming that he is a victim of circumstance. And he sets out to try to prove it to Channel 2's Walter Jacobson. Walter?
Linda, Gacy is, as you noted, I think quite accurately a minute ago, a man who was found guilty of all those murders and of being plenty sane enough to have committed them very quickly. The jury acted in fewer than 2 hours. There were half a dozen pieces of evidence that were just overwhelming. But Gacy now says that he refutes that evidence. And all he's owning up to is having some knowledge of just 5 of the murders and direct knowledge of even fewer than that.
If you want to charge me with anything, charge me with complicity in 2 of the murders.
Just 2?
That's all I know about.
That's his story, that he didn't kill anyone. Just an accomplice, he says, and that he helped dispose of 2. One of them, Robert Peast, who was 15 years old when he went to the house on Summerdale. Gacy owned a construction company and invited young Peast to apply for a job.
Robert Peast was killed by another individual in my home.
How did he get to your home?
He was transported to the house by another.
How did the other, whoever he was, kill Robert Peast?
I believe he was strangled.
You were there, right?
Not during the crime, but I was there afterwards, and I watched the removal of the body.
And what happened to the body afterwards? Was one that was... That
taken
body was put into the river.
It was taken to the river and dumped in the river.
Did you help do that?
Yes, I'm in complicity with that. I've always contended. Don't look at me as an innocent babe of the woods.
Not for a second would I look at John Gacy as a babe in the woods. He may be admitting now only to being an accomplice. But 13 years ago, when he was arrested, he confessed to almost everything. You have all the bodies, Gacy said, and there was even a killer map showing where 27 youths were buried. And in fact, he led police to his garage and sprayed orange paint on the concrete to mark the spot precisely where a body was found.
No.
Now, he says, he was simply marking a spot where some new concrete had been poured.
In regards to going out into the garage, yes, I know I went to the house, and yes, I know I walked in the garage, and they asked me where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. I said, there's the last section where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. They are the ones that took the orange can of paint and said, here, put a mark there. So I put an X there.
So the paint was not to identify the place of burial?
No, it never was. They asked me.
But according to authorities who were with Gacy that morning, he made more than just an X on the floor.
He sprayed a stick figure with the orange spray can in the garage. Not just a mark, a stick figure showing the orientation of the body. Right underneath that stick figure, exactly where he drew it, pointed in the direction he drew it, was the body of John Butkovich.
Yep. And then there's the Gacy confession about how he killed his victims. Strangled them with his now infamous rope trick that police say he demonstrated to them with a rosary bead. He says he was simply discussing knots in general. Catch his sense of humor.
Shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now.
Yeah, right.
Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. You don't need it this long. Okay. I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, well, what kind of a knot do you use? I said, what do you mean knot? When I tie things up? I says, depending on what I'm using it for, I said, the only thing I ever learned from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot. He said, well, show us what that is. So I took, at that time, and again, it's together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, well, here, you put it around. This is hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? Mm-hmm. I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I says, it causes a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.
Precisely the kind of knot found on the ropes wrapped around the necks of the victims found under the house on Summerdale. And there was other compelling evidence, including wallets and rings of the victims found in Gacy's home, that leave no doubt whatever he was the killer. But what is it that made him do what he did? A look at the mind of a serial killer tomorrow. Linda and Bill.
Walter, thank you. Portrait of a killer. Paintings and diaries that provide a frightening view inside the mind of the worst mass killer in American history, John Wayne Gacy. Tonight, Gacy talks exclusively to our Walter Jacobson and reveals a part of his life that most of us have never seen. Walter?
Linda, there are personality traits that are common to mass killers, including arrogance and cunning, and enough cleverness to kill many times without getting caught. John Gacy has all those traits, and then some. He was a Kentucky colonel, and a husband and a father of 5 children, and an actor dressed as a clown. John Gacy loves clowns.
To me, clowning it was a way of relaxation for me. You regressed into childhood, you were able to relax, and you could be goofy if you wanted to. and still you had the facade of your face being covered.
The clown suit hid his face and his evil crimes as well. Even today, on death row, he's painting portraits of himself as a clown. The 33 Flavors clown, and the convicted killer of 33 can't help but chuckle at the irony.
I used to do clowning, and I don't know if you want to mention the name, for an ice cream company in Chicago who had 33 flavors. I used to, I'm serious, Bressler Ice Cream Company. I was their contractor and I was also their clown. And Pogo the Clown was the clowning that I did for charity hospital work for the Democratic Party and that. And Pogo the Clown is originally, Pogo comes from being Polish and on the go all the time, so it's Pogo.
On the go for Democrats as Norwood Park committeeman. A visit with Rosalind Carter, the First Lady during the Carter administration. Gacy right here is hiding the fact that there are bodies buried under his house. He's the great deceiver.
I always felt that service community and community service to others, you know, in my religious background, I felt if you serve other people, it'll come back to serve you. You know, I've always believed that way with generosity.
So if he looks for good and he's generous, why'd he kill 33 people? Nobody knows, but the psychiatrists talk about how obsessive and meticulous he is, enough to kill repeatedly and to stack his victims in a careful and ordered manner, like cordwood under his house. Even now, he's obsessed and meticulous with his life.
What's your life like?
Day to day. I live it day to day.
What do you mean?
If you want to know what my life is like, I log it every day. For the last 12 years, all you got to do is ask. I can tell you everything. I can tell you if the first meal they served me here because I do it daily.
What do you do all day?
Every phone call, everything that I do, every time an officer's around me is logged. Every movement that I make is in the book here.
And he and his lawyers have a log on his victims, too. Everything they did before they were killed.
You know, when I tell you I've got background information on it, we took each one of them by, we took each one of the victims, and this is by their names or by their indictment numbers. And what we did with each one of them, we did profile sheets on them. We wanted to know what this kid was into, what his background was.
Chicago psychiatrist Daniel Johanna of Northwestern University spent a few hours this week screening the interview.
He's very attentive to all details, and so he's sort of, that's the way that he operates. And that's how people like him are able to cover up do these crimes and cover them up, because they are well planned and organized.
One thing John Wayne Gacy could not plan was the way he got that way.
My dad was domineering in the fact he had a different set of values, but also very stern individual. My dad drank a lot. When he drank a lot, yeah, he was abusive to my mother and to me, but I never swung at my dad because I loved him for what he stood for.
Maybe that's where it began to go wrong for John Gacy. He doesn't know, nor does he seem to care. He loses himself in his paintings.
Why the skeleton?
This was done by request. Somebody requested a skull clown, and mostly the punk rockers and the undergrounders like that stuff there. This is Christ as I see him in myself. And it's monolithic because Christ to me is monolithic. He's all things to all people. This here is the Hi-Ho series, and that is self-explanatory. It's the Seven Dwarfs, and they've always stuck to me as a great child painting. And so I've done a series of Hi-Ho series paintings. And this is the 1990 one. This is called Hi-Ho Around the Campfire. It's an original work. Walt Disney is a mentor for me because I've always enjoyed his creativity. And the Seven Dwarfs, if you actually look at all the faces, they represent the 7 different moods that most people can get into.
Moods are important to John Gacy. He has so many of them himself. Angry ones mostly toward his father and his victims, and especially, it seems, toward the victims' families, who are constantly reminding him of his crimes.
That one mother that gets on television all the time who thinks I should be given 33 injections, I think she ought to take 33 Valiums and go lay down. She goes on Geraldo show and all these other shows talking about, I think it's Maori, I think is the name. Her Marine son. Her Marine son, if her Marine son was so great, what the hell did he run away from home 12 times?
As callous and as cunning as he is, John Wayne Gacy talks about his victims tomorrow.
3 times, 33 families forever changed. Tonight in News Extra, the victims of John Wayne Gacy. For the first time, Gacy is speaking out about the young men who died and the loved ones they left behind. And as you know, he is talking exclusively to Channel 2's Walter Jacobson. Walter?
Linda, John Gacy talks about his victims like so many numbers on a scorecard. He seems to have no feelings whatever about them as human beings. But look at them, and you see 33 children who lived and loved and were loved. John Bukovich was 18. Michael Bonin was 17. Randall Reffett, 15. Why them? There's no logical explanation for why them, any of them. Several were runaways from broken homes 14 years ago when John Gacy was preying on families that split apart. Today, in his arrogance, he lectures them.
And nowadays, do you realize by 1993 that 50% of the American families will be single-parented? And that shows a breakdown in the church and not being able to hold families together. And for this reason, children run away from home and seek love in other places.
And wind up in trouble. That's Gacy's view of things. Kids get in trouble because nobody cares about them. Gacy got in trouble when, after 32 victims, he strangled Robert Peast, an all-American, clean-cut local kid whose disappearance attracted police. Such carelessness is typical of a serial killer.
By the time they've committed 10 or 12, they are very, very laid back. By the time they commit 20, 15 or 20, they start getting careless, cavalier.
If it sounds familiar, it's because you've heard the experts say it about Jeffrey Dahmer. Gacy dislikes the comparison.
What do I think of Jeffrey Dahmer? I don't know the man personally, but I'll tell you this. That's a good example as to why insanity doesn't belong in the courtroom. Because if Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't meet the requirements for insanity, then I'd hate like hell to run into the guy that does.
Do you feel
Beyond that, I have no comment on Jeffrey Dahmer because I'm not Jeffrey Dahmer. And I would not, whether it's Berkowitz, whether it's Bundy, whether it's Williams, Wayne Williams down in Atlanta, or any of the others, or Charlie Manson. See, I don't comment about other cases for the simple fact is that I wasn't there.
Do you feel somewhat of a kinship with some of these people?
God, I hate that when they put me in the same club with them.
That's precisely the club that John Gacy belongs in. And the pain felt by Dahmer's victims is still felt 13 years later by the families of Gacy's victims.
When you have a child taken out of your life, it is like a little pieces taken out of your heart. You can never forget it. Everything keeps revolving back to the day when he did this or he did that, and we reminisce.
Dolores Nieder, courageous mother, still in the same house on the northwest side of Chicago. 13 years remembering Johnny, who was a Marine and then studying to be an accountant. Like others, he went to Gacy's house for a job and never came back. About which John Gacy expresses no remorse whatever. On the contrary, he says he's a victim for being found guilty, the 34th victim, and he says the families are victims because they don't know who the real killer is.
I'm not only the victim here. I might be the 34th victim, but there are other victims to this crime, and that is the family. Because if I know that I didn't commit the crime, then I have been given the injustice, and so has the families. And nobody gives a damn about the families.
As though he cares, which clearly he does not. And when the families insist that John Gacy pay for his crimes with his life, his real feelings come out.
That one mother that gets on television all the time who thinks I should be given 33 injections, I think she ought to take 33 Valiums and go lay down. She goes on Geraldo Show and all these other shows talking about, I think it's Maori, I think is the name. Her Marine son. If her Marine son was so great, what the hell did he run away from home 12 times?
It's not enough for him to be murdered.
I know that.
He's also lying. Johnny was not a runaway. And as to Gacy's snide remark about the Valium?
Well, Walter, it's hard for me to comprehend that Gacy has the right to say something like that about me because of the fact of what he did. What right has he to
say anything about you at all?
Right.
John Gacy now faces death by lethal injection. Tomorrow night we'll hear what he has to say about that. In fact, Gacy's now talking about many things. He says, for example, that there were accomplices in his murders.
Had this case properly been investigated, I think you would have had, there should have been 4 indictments. A minimum of 4 indictments. And I say that sincerely.
And he names names.
In News Extra, we've heard an extraordinary story told by a desperate man. John Wayne Gacy is trying to rewrite history and retry his case. Tonight, Gacy's story focuses on the house on Summerdale. For years, it was his home. As Channel 2's Walter Jacobson is here to tell us, it is the center of Gacy's case and all of his alibis. Walter?
Linda, as you know, it was the house on Summerdale that he buried 26 of the 33 bodies. It was his home and his office as well, and he now says there was so much going on inside that house that any number of people could have been involved.
See, there's a misconception of what the house on Summerdale is. It's not a house where you work 9 to 5 and come home, and it's like a house where you live in. The living room was the private office section. One of the bedrooms was a terrarium. The kitchen was more like a fast food kitchen.
He's painting a picture of a busy place, but conveniently omitting the crawl space, which he divided into plots like a cemetery, numbers 1 through 26, 6 feet by about 3 feet, and 1.5 feet deep. That was under the house. Up above 8213 West Summerdale was not only where Gacy lived, as he says, but headquarters for his company, PDM Construction, and a flop house for PDM employees, upon whom Gacy is now laying the blame for the murders.
We have always contended there's others involved. At the time of my arrest, there was 4 other suspects. 3 of the suspects that we knew that they knew then was Michael Rossi, David Cram, and Philip Paskey, all employees of PDM contractors, all with keys to the house on Summerdale.
And they had friends, Gacy says, and friends of friends, as he weaves for me an alibi. There was Michael Rossi, for one, who worked for PDM and actually lived there during the time of the murders. Gacy and Rossi socialized in the house with Johnny Zick, victim number 3, the night he was murdered.
I met him the night he was killed because I met him with Michael Rossi. I had a drink with the 2 of them, and then I left. And when I next seen the individual, he was dead.
Where did you see him?
Why didn't I say something about it? Because it wasn't my business, and I stayed out of other people's business.
Where did you see him dead?
In the house on Summerdale.
And did Rossi tell you who had killed him?
No, Rossi didn't say nothing. Rossi was sleeping on the couch. I just left.
And how did he get buried? Do you know?
He was buried in the crawl space. When I come back, he wasn't there. So, Walter, that's your guess as to who put him in the ground in that.
Gacy finds a corpse in his living room and doesn't say anything because it's not his business? Well, if you don't believe that, he has another story about being so high on drugs he didn't know what he was doing.
No, I started back in 1984. I started taking 10 milligram of Valium, and by the time 1978 came around, I was doing 130 milligram of Valium. But then I was moving 80 jobs a year, and I was working 16 to 18-hour days, and I just had to have something to take the pressure off.
So the next thing people wonder is what about the smell in the house of decomposing bodies? Gacy has a lasso-opso story for that.
When I was arrested, they claimed, well, there was a putrefied odor in the house. And I contend that was a lot of hogwash, too, because one Officer Schultz claims on the 18th or on the 19th that as he came into the house, we had come into the house and my little Lhasa Apso was in the house. And of course he had been locked in the kitchen, you know, all day. Well, the little puppy, he piddles, see, and while he's piddling and while he is doing his business on the paper and that, you can imagine what it smells like if you go into a closed room. And when the heat came on, as soon as the heat came on, it'd give you, you know, that strong feces odor.
Or if not the dog, maybe just the house itself. How about the sump pump?
You know, I found it as odd when we bought the house that a house with a crawl space would need a sump pump. But then I learned the first time it rained that this ground gets wet under there and then the crawl space actually floods up to a foot deep in water. And then as it recedes, it puts out a musty odor. There was always a musty odor in that house.
These excuses, and the ones we've heard all week, are the bases for Gacy's appeals, which are expected to go on for another 2 years, maybe 3, before his death sentence is carried out. What have 13 years of thinking about that done to John Gacy? Nothing, he says, nothing at all.
I'm just as lovable and jokeable as I was back then. You know, I don't sit around worrying about the death penalty or things like that, no.
How could you not?
If you believe you've lived your life the right way, then you do not have nothing to fear, in my case.
You're not worried about facing God?
No. I'm fairly comfortable with him. I've been at the Catholic services, I'm the server for the priest for the last 10 years. I have no qualms about doing that. I've had confession, I have communion, and I am at peace with myself.
That's what he says, that he's at peace with himself, but he seemed to me to be highly agitated and very frightened about death. He says he's religious, so how could he not be afraid of death, or what will happen to him after death? Clearly, John Gacy's afraid enough to be doing whatever he can to avoid his execution, making up new excuses, denying his involvement, trying now to involve others, anything to open his case and prolong his life. But, given the facts of the case, no matter what he does, it won't be enough.
Now I will talk about John Wayne Gacy's final moments and his last words leading up to his death. Hey there, true crime aficionados. Today, we're diving into the chilling and botched execution of one of America's most notorious serial killers, John Wayne Gacy. Buckle up. This one's a wild ride. So on May 10th, 1994, Gacy was finally scheduled to meet his fate via lethal injection in Illinois. Now, if you're thinking this was going to be straightforward, think again. Gacy's last meal was a bucket of KFC chicken, fried shrimp, French fries, fresh strawberries, and a Diet Coke. Quite the feast, right? As the clock struck midnight, Gacy was led to the execution chamber. The room was sterile, cold, and filled with an eerie tension. The witnesses, consisting of victims' family members, journalists, and officials, were seated behind a glass partition. The execution team began the process by injecting Gacy with a series of chemicals. First up was sodium thiopental to knock him out, then pancuronium bromide to paralyze his muscles, and finally, potassium chloride to stop his heart. But here's where things went horribly wrong. Shortly after the chemicals were administered, something unexpected happened. The IV tube delivering the lethal concoction clogged. Gacy was left gasping and convulsing on the gurney. The execution team scrambled to fix the issue, but the delay caused a horrifying spectacle for everyone watching. What was supposed to be a quick and clinical end turned into a gruesome and drawn-out affair. It took a total of 18 minutes for John Wayne Gacy to die. The malfunction led to a flurry of controversy and debates about the ethics and efficacy of lethal injection. For the families of Gacy's 33 known victims, those 18 minutes were a small fraction of the years of pain and suffering they had endured. While many felt a sense of closure, the botched execution added another layer of horror to an already chilling story. So, why did this happen? Some say it was a fitting end for a man who caused so much pain. Others argue it was a significant failure of the justice system. Either way, John Wayne Gacy's execution remains one of the most infamous botched executions in American history. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the darkest corners of true crime. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe. And before we go, when asked if he had any last words, Gacy turned to the guards and the victims' families and said, "Kiss my ass. How's that for final words?" In a shadowy underworld of crime, where the ordinary meets the extraordinary, you've been journeying with me, Jason King. We've dissected the minds of some of the most notorious serial killers, peeling back the layers of their darkest secrets. Every shadowy corner we've turned, every chilling confession we've analyzed, has been a step deeper into the abyss. But remember, the abyss also gazes back. So, brace yourself as we prepare to dive even deeper. Next time, we'll unravel a tale so twisted it will make your spine tingle with anticipation. An enigma so intricate it will have you questioning everything you thought you knew. Until then, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. This is Jason King, signing off.